Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on the Big Blue View YouTube channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. All right, we haven't done a show since the Giants set their initial 53-man roster. I guess I've been slacking a little bit, but we're back and. We'll talk about the roster. We'll talk about some of the things that have been going on with the Giants. We'll spin ahead a little bit to thoughts on the beginning of the 2024 regular season. And here to help me do all of that is Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants. And whatever her site is called over on Sports Illustrated these days, I know it's not Giants country, even though that's what it says behind her head there. Patty, how you doing? And what is it called these days?
Yeah, it's called New York Giants on SI. I'm in the process of contacting the woodmaker who made me the Giants country sign and the Locked On New York Giants sign. He's a little backed up because he's that good, but I am going to get a new sign made. But Ed, I got to ask you, what is with you? I mean, slacking off? That's we could put you in jail for that.
Yeah, you probably could, Patty. You probably could. But what can I tell you? I'm taking one last little trip for the summer up to the lake. That's where I am for a few days. Spend the rest of the week, spend the Labor Day holiday at the lake before we take the boat out of the water and all that good stuff. So I'm after that grueling training camp that Brian Dable put me through. I'm taking a little bit of R&R.
And I know, and you didn't make the roster either.
I know, and I I mean I could be the practice squad quarterback.
I don't think you're good
You
enough
know,
for the practice squad either.
oh, here we go. Here we go. But see, you can make that up to me because you promised me that there might be some murder during the show.
I said that.
I
Oh,
I let's put it this way. I I assumed as much because Patricia is being bothered by a fly that is buzzing around her office and she's been trying to kill it and 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 we're hoping for the death of a fly on air here.
oh
So
my
we'll
gosh, you
see
make
what
me sound like a
happens.
brutal murderer. I just want the thing and leave me alone. Actually, I just want to get it to the door so I could shoo it out the door and not have to kill it. But you know,
Oh, come on, Patty. It would make a better show
I
if
only
you if
allow one animal in my house, and that's the four-legged kind. And right now it's by the window growling for some reason because she
oh,
probably sees a cat or something out in the yard.
oh, there you go. Hey, keep you she'll keep you safe, Patty.
Yes,
Anyway,
she
Patty,
is.
let's talk New York Giants. Let's talk a little bit about the roster and all that fun stuff. And before we get to the roster, I have to ask you about the big topic of conversation the last day or so, the Giants unretiring a jersey number for Malik Neighbors. Is this a big deal to you? Is it not a big deal? Does it bother you? Do you not care? How do you feel about the Giants doing this for Neighbors? Who, as good a player as he looks like he is a rookie who hasn't played a snap yet.
Personally, I mean, I've never cared much about jersey numbers or what color jersey the team's wearing or I don't care about that stuff. I know it's important to some fans and I get that and that's fine. But in this case, I think the reason why it's being made such a big deal over is because Ray Flaherty was the first NFL player to have his jersey retired in history. All right. I think they retired it, I want to say in 1945, maybe, I think it was. So it's been almost 90 years or something like that. But anyway, yeah, it doesn't matter. Look, if the family is okay with it and they've given their blessings and the Giants organization's okay with it, then why would anybody have a problem with it? It's not like, Malik Neighbors came and made the demand. I have to have number one, otherwise I'm not going to play this year. He asked about it. They said, okay, let's see what we could do. And
Mhm.
that shows you the amount of respect that they have for him. It also shows you that they are really counting on this guy to help turn their fortunes around. The Giants haven't had a player on offense, you could go back to Saquon Barkley, make a case for him, but they haven't really had an exciting player on offense that, I think is going to drive jersey sales. You have Barkley and then before him Odell Beckham Jr. So yeah, for me, it doesn't matter. I mean, they could
No,
put him in double zero for all I care. Just go out there, play, and make and win games for the Giants.
I hear you, Patty. It bothers me more that they have never retired Harry Carson's number
Mm.
than the fact that they're unretiring a jersey number with the permission of of the man's family.
Yeah, I mean, through the years, you could kind of make a case for why they didn't retire Harry's number. I personally think they should have. I mean, I think Harry, was a pioneer when he played, a team captain. He was one of the best at his position. Helped them win the Super Bowl, that first Super Bowl. So yeah, I would like to see that number retired. I'd like to see Carl Banks's number retired, to be honest with you, because I've always thought Carl Banks has been a little bit, underrated by some people. I think Carl Banks is, helped certainly help.
Carl will tell you as much, you know?
Well, I mean, uh, he can think what he wants. I'm not going to argue with Carl Banks, but
No.
yeah, I've always thought he was a little underrated. But you know what? You can only retire so many numbers, and then you start running out. So the Giants had what 16 numbers retired before they unretired Flaherty's number.
Yeah, I don't know
So
the exact number.
I think it was 16. I want to say 16, but I could
Mhm.
be wrong.
Okay, so yeah, I'm not I it doesn't bother me either way, either. So, but I was curious, because that seems to be a big topic of conversation here the last couple of days. Anyway, Patty, let's talk about the 53-man roster. And as Brian Daboll has said, it's fluid. It's been fluid ever since it was initially announced, 4 hours after it was supposed to be announced. Um, Changes continue to be made due to injury, due to waiver claims, all that sort of stuff. Let me ask you this. When you look at the roster, what did you like about the way the Giants constructed this roster? And after that, I'll ask you, what you found curious or what you didn't like. But let's start with what you liked about the way they constructed this roster.
Well, I like how they approached the offensive line. They went with the veteran approach. And if you remember, Ed, we talked about this way, way back in the off season, and we both agreed that that unit, above all else, needed to hit the ground running. With this being a make or break year for Daniel Jones, at the time we didn't know if he was going to be ready to go, but we agreed that that unit needed to hit the ground running. And in order to do that, they brought in veterans who, should be able to do that, hit the ground running. And they have some young guys, and they're going to, take the time to develop those guys so that now that they have guys in the pipeline. So I think they're finally approaching the offensive line the right way, and not just, with any old veterans, but guys that work together, who are familiar with what Carmen Brasillo teaches, guys who can play at a decent enough level. So that's one thing that certainly jumped out at me. The front seven on the defense, I think you got to love the Brian Burns acquisition. Now, people talk about pressure on players. I think there's a little bit of pressure on Brian Burns because he got that big payday, but you know what? He's still young. He's been productive. And, people are like, well, will the Giants get what they paid for out of him? If he forces or helps to force opposing offenses to pick their poison as to where they're going to double up, then yes, they will have gotten their money's worth. It's not all about sacks. So I definitely like that. Um, what else do I like? Uh, I think I like the receiver. They have a good group of receivers. I think that's actually one of the strengths on offense. Malik Neighbors obviously is going to be number one receiver, but you've got Wandale Robinson, who's kind of like your gadget guy. You've got Darius Slayton, who is being retained. Uh, Deep threat, Jalen Hyatt. So you've got a nice core group there. And I don't dislike the running back group. The depth behind Devin Singletary, I'm a little concerned with, but I think Devin Singletary is very underrated. And I'm not saying he's going to put up Saquon Barkley type of numbers, but I think they're going to be okay with him leading that running back group.
All right, so let's go to the other side of the equation. What did you not like, or what did you find curious about the way that they've structured this final roster?
Well, I got to start with the defensive secondary, specifically cornerback. They have some young talent there. They have a very good coach in Jerome Henderson, but we saw the practices, we saw the preseason games, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little concerned about the depth there. Because what happens if, God forbid, there's an injury to Deontay Banks? Who steps up now? All right. Who's going to be cornerback two? Cordell Flat has been injured most of the summer, which was a knock on him, last year. And I think even you go back to the spring, Jerome Henderson even said, look, he's a good player, but he's had some injuries the first couple of years. So I'm a little bit concerned about that defensive secondary, in particular the cornerback role. I understand, on waivers, there were a bunch of guys that were available on waivers, but maybe the Giants felt that none of them were better than what they had. But I thought maybe they would make some kind of move, whether it be to trade for a guy, maybe look to see if they couldn't swap out one of their receivers and trade for a guy. But it takes two sides to trade, and I think they're just kind of going to hope that the defensive front can mask some of the concerns that maybe exist in that defensive secondary. I think on the offensive side, I'm still a little concerned about quarterback. All right. The injury history with Daniel Jones, I think you can't ignore that. Drew Lock is still apparently dealing with an oblique injury, although they say he's going to be fine, but we'll have to wait and see. So maybe there's just a smidge of concern there regarding the health of that unit, and can that unit rise to the occasion, because you've got a solid, a much solid offensive line, you've got good receivers, decent running game. The quarterback's got to step up, whether it's Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito. That unit's got to step up, and you know they got to stay healthy above all.
All right, Patty, since you went there, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is Daniel Jones. So let me do that now. When you look at Jones, when you think about Jones, we all know what his first 5 years have been, up and down, and we all know how people feel about him. And for a guy who's as vanilla as he is, uh, he certainly engenders his fair share of vitriol when you mention his name. Um, when you look at Daniel Jones, 2024 season, look in your crystal ball. Good year, bad year for Jones. And the second part of that question is, does he do enough to keep his job not only all year, but into next year?
I think he's set up to have success. All right. He's got like I said, an improved offensive line. If that offensive line stays healthy, the pass protection should be better. He's got a very, very good group of receivers. All right. He's got Brian Dable going to be in his ear now calling the plays, which is, quite frankly, I get why they didn't do it the first 2 years that Dable was here, but I actually applaud this, even though I'm a fan of the CEO style head coach. I think in this case, it makes sense for Dable to call the plays. So there are no excuses right now for Daniel Jones not to succeed. The knee is apparently healthy and he's recovered from that ACL. He's still playing fearlessly. What I remain worried about with Daniel Jones is sometimes you just watch him and he feels the need to make a play when nobody else around him is making a play, and it leads to stupid decisions. See the pick six that he threw against the Texans. You can't have that. You've got to know when to give up and live to see the next down. And if it means throwing at the guy's feet or whatever, you do what you got to do. And that's the
Mhm.
one thing I continue to be worried about is that post-snap decision-making process, especially when things around him break down. Does he do enough to keep his job? I think he's set up for that, but I also think that this is, it's a wait and see. I mean, are we gonna see the Daniel Jones that we saw in 2022 who was functional, who had, a good season, who took advantage of, the opportunities that were there? I think the jury's still out, Ed. I mean, I don't know that I can sit here and definitely say, yeah, he's going to do enough, or no, he's not going to do enough. Um, Obviously, they're going to be watching this very closely because the other factor is he's got that injury guarantee. So if things start to crumble around him, now they're going to have to decide: do we continue to roll with this guy, or do we pull him? Similar to how Derek Carr was pulled and with the Raiders, and I think Russell Wilson was pulled with Denver. Do we pull him to avoid risking that injury guarantee triggering? Excuse me. So the jury is still out, I think, on him.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very tricky situation, and a lot of it, as you indicated, Patty, a lot of it may have nothing to do with how well he plays or how poorly he plays. It may have to do with the overall record and how things are around him.
Yeah.
All
Yeah. I
right.
mean, look, they're optimistic, but we got to see.
Let me ask you, it's partially a roster question. It's partially just an overall question. Do you feel better about this team entering the 2024 season than you did about the version of the Giants that we saw last year? And that's not necessarily is the roster better, but do you feel better about this team and just in the way it's prepared in the roster itself, in the so many changes in the coaching staff, do you feel better about this group, entering 2024?
I do. I actually do. I think Brian Dable has been a lot calmer since he's taken over the play calling. And I think that's going to help because look, if they're going to go down with if they're going to go down the tubes, he's going to be the one, leading the way with his play calling. So, I don't think it'll result in a volatile situation on the sideline. Last year, the way they prepared, and you and I talked about this so many times, we sat there and we were like, what are they doing? We talked about the offensive line and how they didn't set that unit. They were still fiddling with that unit leading into the first week of the regular season. And we were like, what are you guys doing here? We questioned, all the receivers they added and, what they had there. So there were a lot more questions, I think, last year than there were this year. This year, Dable went with more 11 on 11 drills, although he did admit that that was to help Daniel Jones get ready, which, quite honestly, why not do more of that? Especially if you're going to not play your starters, except for one game in the preseason. And we questioned that too. Remember last year we said, oh, they only played one series and oh, that was it. And they didn't look ready. So now
Right.
they got a little bit more quality work. I would have liked to have seen them play in the first preseason game.
Agreed.
Dable I know why Dable didn't do it, but I would have liked to have seen them get that work in live competition because no matter how much you try and simulate a game scenario in practice, you don't have live tackling. The quarterback can't be touched. So therefore he's got almost like a false sense of timing as far as, oh, that's a sack, but hey, my receiver's open, so I'm still going to make the throw anyway. I mean, that would probably be my only critique is that I would have played the starters a little bit more. Maybe, definitely would have sat them against the Jets, but I would have definitely played them in the first and second preseason games, even if it was just a quarter in the first one and then a half in the second.
My issue, Patty, and I'm kind of glad you brought it up. My issue with each team seems to have its own way of dealing with that third preseason game. Some teams do play their starters a little bit. Some teams do what the Giants did, and starters for the most part don't play unless there's a specific reason, like John Michael Schmitz needing to get some snaps. Um, but I look at it this way. the way the schedule is now, there's a 2-week break from the third preseason game to the opener. So you're
Mhm.
basically asking these guys if they don't play, they've basically gone 3 full weeks without competition when you get to week 1. And and that bothers me some. So
Mhm.
I agree wholeheartedly with you that I would rather have seen them play a little bit in that game, but so be it. As we were talking, as we're talking about the roster and whether it feels better and this and that, one thing that I keep coming back to, Patty, is it's year 3 for Joe Shane. But for me, this finally feels like Joe Shane's team. It finally feels like it's almost entirely his roster. I think Aziz Ojulari is the only player on the roster who is a pure Dave Gettleman player at this point, meaning he was not only drafted by Gettleman, but Joe hasn't given Aziz Ojulari a new contract either. Everyone else that was drafted by Dave that is still with the Giants has gotten a contract from Joe Shane. So
Mhm.
it feels like it's finally Joe Shane's team. It's finally beginning to be shaped the way that Joe wants to shape it in terms of, resources and how he spends his money and all of that. Do you feel the same way? Like this is finally looking like what Joe actually wants to build?
I think so. I think the next step for this roster is you got to get a little bit more out of your draft picks. I think we could probably sit here and say that they haven't gotten, as much maybe as they would have liked to out of their draft picks. Now, to be fair, you know, you give a draft class 3 years to really develop. And we've seen some of Shane's draft picks. I think two of them didn't make the final 53 this year. So, you want to see these guys take the next step. You want to see John Michael Schmitz take that next step in year 2. You want to see Joshua Zudu achieve consistency, and what's this year 3 for him? You want to see, Kayvon Thibodeau, as good of a year as he had last year, build on that. Deontay Banks, you want to see him step up, and so on and so forth. You can go down the list here, but I do think, that this is Joe's team built with, obviously Brian's, input, and they've got to, the arrow's got to start pointing up at this point. You can't say now, oh, we're in that transition phase where we're halfway between what Gettleman left behind versus what Joe brought in.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I look at this year, Patty, um, I look at that Minnesota game week 1. I look at, Washington the week after that. It just to me the beginning of this season is so important, for the Giants. You agree with that just in terms of how important the first few weeks of this year are?
Oh, absolutely. It's important for confidence. It's important for continuity. If you get off to an 0-2 start and you've got that stretch between week 3 and week 8 that's coming up, which is a brutal stretch, it's going to be a long year. So going into week 3 2-0 sure feels a lot better than going in at 1-1 or even 0-2. So, you haven't really had, if you think about it, you haven't really had all the starters together on the field. The offensive line, the starting offensive line didn't take a single snap together until what? This week in practice, the bye week, so to speak.
Right.
So, you want to get them out there and you want to say, okay, look, we're gelling, we're confident, we're in a rhythm. Let's just go out there and boom, hit the ground running, as opposed to second guessing and saying, okay, well, I'm not really sure what this guy's going to do next to me because I haven't played next to him.
Well, I've always Joe Shane used to talk about, or not Joe Shane, Joe Judge used to talk about like the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season being an extension of the preseason where you're still trying to figure out what you have and what you don't have and how to use guys and this and that.
Mhm.
And and Brian Daboll has had that New England sort of training as well. And I think unf- that just when you're a team that's not, guaranteed playoff team, and as soon as you roll the footballs out, you're going to win 12 games. You just can't approach things that way. Game one means as much as game 16 because if you don't win games 1, 2, 3, 4, games 15, 16, 17 don't mean anything.
Yeah.
So I've been glad to see the Giants do more competitively, more 11 on 11, some longer practices, some harder practices. I've been glad to see the intensity turned up a little bit
Yeah,
this
I
season.
gotta tell you, I hated that approach that Joe Judge used to preach, to say,
Mhm.
"Oh, you don't find out about your team until 3 or 4 weeks in." Well, then what the heck are you doing the 5 weeks or so of training camp and then the 2 months or whatever it is, 2.5 months in the spring? If you don't know by then what you've got, then come on. I never
Yeah.
bought that. I thought that was just a lazy approach, and it irked me when he said that, and you're right. I mean, you can't afford if you're a team that's trying to take the next step, you can't afford to sit there and say, "Oh, well, we can afford to throw away the first 3 or 4 games." No, you only have 17 games. Every game is important, and that's just a really lousy approach, in my opinion, for any head coach to take. That's like, why don't we just throw the games away and just tank, which drives me crazy. See
Absolutely.
what you
Patty, we
started?
we got you we got you fired up. That
Well,
that
because
fly
I hate
that fly
I'm not a fan of the tank argument. Every once in a while, somebody will write to me and say, "Oh, should they tank for Shador Sanders?" I'm like, "Don't even ask me if the team should tank." I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I played competitive sports. I wouldn't even think of giving anything less than my best. And I would think these athletes who train a heck of a lot harder than I did as a kid and who invest so much money in themselves and their craft, you really want to throw that away just to tank? Come on.
and Patty, I get it at times in some sports I get it, but I agree with you. I hate it. You know what? If you're bad enough if you're bad enough to get the first pick in the draft or whatever, then you're bad enough. But if you're trying to be that bad, if you're trying to be that bad, I can't have any respect for that at all. Just as you said, I mean, these guys, these players are putting their bodies on the line. They're putting their health on the line. Their careers are on the line. They're trying to get a pay. They're trying to extend their careers to make a living for a finite period of time. Are you going to tell me that the results of what they do shouldn't matter?
Right.
I
And let me
mean,
just throw
well,
this
and coaches too.
let me
Go
throw
ahead,
this
Patty.
out. Sorry, and I don't mean to cut you off here. Do you remember when the Eagles did what they did at the end of what was it, the 2020 season, I think it was? Do you remember when Doug
Right.
Peterson
Yep.
and do you remember how Joe Judge was how upset he was by that?
Yep.
Basically accusing them of tanking?
Yep.
I mean, and the Giant fans were also upset by that because it basically cost the Giants a playoff spot.
Right.
So why would you even mention tanking? You see
It
what it does, and it's just not a good thing. And in my opinion, it's
it
got no place in any game.
it disrespects the sport. It disrespects the profession and the people in it. So
Yep.
I'm glad, so we got you worked up, Patty. I feel bad for that fly now if you ever catch him.
I haven't seen him lately, so wherever he is, maybe
Maybe
he
the
took a
dog,
day, maybe he
maybe the dog got him.
or maybe he's waiting by the window to get out with the dog. So we'll find out.
All right. Patty, thank you as always, folks. Check out Patty's work at Locked On Giants and Sports Illustrated Giants, whatever that's called now,
New
Patty. I didn't
York
write it down
Giants
and
on
on SI.
SI.com.
Get a new sign and I'll remember what it is, Patty.
If I have to have a sign reminding you, Ed, I
Patty,
mean, come on, man.
I'm getting old. What can I tell you? You know,
Next time,
if I
I
don't
hope I
write it
remember.
down, if I don't write it down, it's not getting remembered. What can I
All
tell
right.
you?
Well, next time we do a show together, I'll make sure I write it on my pad and I do this so that
There
you
you
don't
go.
forget.
Absolutely. That'll work. That'll work. All right. All right. Patty, thank you as always. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.